you need to add to your repertoire when you're interviewing radio people and interviewing them on your podcast. You need to include the question, what prank jokes were you involved in over the years? Because there are a lot of them that don't normally get told casually.
And that's the voice of Radio Hall of Famer Roger W. Morgan. Last time we're talking about different genres of music and how formats come and go and change around and whatnot. Now, you were also at KOIL in Omaha twice. Tell us about your time there.
Well, when I was at KOIL in Omaha, that was the first time that I invented a feature called Morganizing. And that may come as a surprise to a lot of people, but I never knew of Robert W. Morgan early in my career as Roger W. Morgan. That name was given to me in Omaha, Roger W. Morgan. That's not my birth name. My birth name is Jerry Lambert. The only time I ever used that name on the air was clear back to that first story I gave you about KGay Radio in Salem. That was my early morning name on the radio, Jerry Lambert. Then they changed it to Jim Hunter when I went to KBZY, and to Jimmy Rabbit when I went to Seattle. And it was when I went to KOIL in Omaha when they first changed my name to Roger W. Morgan. Confusing to the point where I had to put it on a piece of paper and leave it on the board in front of me so that I remembered what my name was. And then I was on. This is a story all into itself. One New Year's Eve, I got assigned to be on the air while everybody else was out partying. The program director, I wish I could think of his name. He went on to program WLS in Chicago. Hanks. I'll get his name for you in a bit. You're having me recall too many names now.
I think the program director you think about at WLS was John Rook, was it?
No, I did work with John Rook. That's not it. I can't think of his name. Mike McCormick was his name in Omaha, but he went to WLS as program director, and I thought it was as his last name was Hanks, but I may be mistaken. Check that out. But John Rook, I was actually in Sacramento, and that's where I worked with John Rook. I was program director at the station in Sacramento, KROY, KROY, and on the air there, and I worked. John Rook was our program consultant at that time, so I did work with John too. Anyway, he was the guy who said, we want to call you Roger W. Morgan, and I am assigned to do the nighttime show on New Year's Eve. And I knew I could come up with any kind of wild, creative format that I wanted to do because nobody from the station was listening. And me and Bob Benson, who, by the way, went on to be vice president of ABC Radio News, he was assigned to do the news on that evening show. Bob came up with an idea. He said, Roger, why don't we call some people and poke them on the phone, just prank call and put it right on the air. We did. And I know that sounds bizarre, and it was bizarre at a station that was very rigid about its format. Bob Benson made the call. He called a lady who had an ad in the newspaper for little German Shepherd puppies she wanted to sell. And you could tell she loved the little puppies. And she wanted to sell them into a home that would love and caress and cherish them. And so Bob calls up, and he said he's interested in buying one of these German Shepherd puppies, but he wants it to be as mean as it can be. And the lady was really sweet and kind. Bob, speaking in a German dialect, kept saying, I want him to be so mean and cruel. He'll tear your arm off. And the lady reacted so violently to this whole idea that she said, I can't go out with this phone call anymore. And he said, you know what? You're on Roger W. Morgan's show, and you've just been Morganized. Well, the owner of the radio station, Don Burden, heard about the call. And rather than being angry, Don Burden said, the idea is a great idea, but why don't you record them ahead of time, make sure they're airable before you put them on? And I started a feature called Morganizing, put on phone calls, and it became the biggest thing I had ever done on the radio, a feature that made a tremendous amount of money for the station, but carved out a lot of work for me. I had to do a different one every day, and I would record them in advance, cut down the call to a point where the victim of the call was outrageously funny, and the call could be presented on the air in a short 2 to 3 minute time period, and it was a great feature. That was a turning point in my career.
That sounds really awesome, because the Morganized I knew was Robert W. Morgan, and pretty much he was like, he'd ask, how much do you weigh? I don't want to say, how much do you want to lose? 30 pounds. Zap, you're Morganized.
Yeah, right.
He sounded just like Don Imus.
That's apparently where Bob Benson got the idea to call it Morganizing, but it turned into a great big feature for me, and really it increased my salary to a point where it went from being an average salary in Omaha, Nebraska, to being a huge deal, and it turned my career around. It was a total turnaround. You need to go back to Google and just Google Roger W. Morgan Morganizing. You may run across some of those phone calls that we did.
In fact, I was looking at some research here in World Radio. There was worldradiohistory.com. They mentioned several instances of off-air pranks happening at KOIL. It said one Saturday afternoon you filled a truck with cement at a drive-in.
Yeah. Joe Light, who was a great nighttime personality, he and I did a remote broadcast out at a local drive-in theater. I introduced the evening. I can't remember the shows that were playing that night, but I introduced the whole evening of entertainment. We gave away prizes. I went back and got my car, and Joe Light took over as MC. What he didn't know was that I had said on the air, I think I'll Morganize Joe Light somehow at the big event tonight at the 72nd Street Drive-In. Nobody knew what I was going to do, but what I had done is I called a concrete company. Joe had an old car that barely ran, and he had parked it out in front of the screen at the 72nd Street Drive-In. So while Joe was on stage, this concrete truck rolls up, kind of circled the crowd at the drive-in theater, and then pulled into the parking area where the drive-in movie was being shown, pulled up next to Joe Light's car, stuck the spout inside the window, and filled that car with concrete while Joe was on the stage. And Joe observed it and just lost his mind. Couldn't believe we were doing it. And so that was my clever bit to Morganize Joe. He and I kind of had an on-the-air battle going back and forth. What happened later was a horrible event. The car sat there for 3 or 4 days after we did this thing, and the cement hardened, and they had to get several trucks to come in and drag it out of there. It tore up a whole big section of 72nd Road out in front of the theater. I think Star Stations ended up paying a huge penalty for the damage that was done that night. You found some interesting stuff, Josh.
Then a live buffalo was brought into Don Burton's prized KOIL building late one night.
Maybe I was meant to be a prankster. Rodeo cowboy Casey Tibbs, who was a famous rodeo cowboy at that time, made a movie about a buffalo named Bill. And I found out that Casey Tibbs was coming to town, and he was going to bring that buffalo and have it at the theater the night they showed that movie. Well, as a child, I had known Casey Tibbs, and I called him up and said, when you bring the buffalo to town, could we take a picture of it over at our new building? Our new building, by the way, Josh, was a multi-million-dollar structure that was absolutely beyond belief in that era, or a building for a radio station. It was incredible. And this happened on the weekend. Don Burton, the owner of the company, made a list of rules, things that we were to do and not to do in that building. For example, you couldn't trade ashtrays with any other office because everything had been put in that building specifically for the room that it was in. Don't move things around. I mean, it was a ridiculous set of rules.
Did the ashtrays look different or something?
The guy was just a madman when it came to protecting this building. So I thought a funny thing would be called the local photographer, Donald Jack. And I called Donald Jack up, and I said, come over to the station and be there at 4 o'clock this afternoon. And when you get there, I'm going to take the Buffalo up to Don Burden's office. They said, how are you going to get it upstairs? I said, there's an elevator. We'll take it up the elevator. Well, the elevator creaked and moaned when we took it up. Nobody was there on the weekend. Nobody else was there except I called about a dozen of the people on the air and said, you want to be in on a real funny picture? Meet me at 4 o'clock at the station. They came down without any idea what I was going to do. We took a series of pictures of that buffalo in Don Burden's office, all over the building, and then we all chickened out. We didn't want to show it to him. We didn't dare show it to him because we thought we'd all lose our jobs. A local newspaper columnist heard of what we did, and when I was offered a job to leave KOIL in Omaha, this guy said, when you leave and after you're gone or after you absolutely commit to going to another station, would you mind if I published a picture in the newspaper? I said, no, you can do it at that time. Well, it turned out I didn't take the next job. He put the picture in the newspaper, and Don Burden called me to his office, and he was sputtering, and I thought it was all over. He said, God, this is the kind of thing I need in Indianapolis. That's when he decided to send me to Indianapolis.
Oh.
I guess really looking back on this career, I could have conducted myself in a more professional way at several steps.
What were some other practical jokes you pulled over the years?
Unfortunately, Josh, there are several that I enjoy telling, but I'm not going to share them.
Oh, that's
here.
okay.
It's just really, they're just brutal, but I've mellowed out so much, it hardly seems like me anymore, and I'm a little embarrassed to tell some of the stuff, but you've got the good ones.
There you go. I remember, one time going to summer camp, and there was the first night. I didn't bring an alarm clock, but obviously everybody else did, or at least I think they did. And so about 2:30 in the morning, all the alarm clocks went off. Yeah. And we thought that even the fire alarm or the smoke detector was going off. So this one kid was like jumping up in the air trying to hit the smoke detector on the ceiling to make it go away because it sounded just like a smoke detector.
And you were behind that, Josh?
No, I wasn't. It was our camp counselor that was, but I thought it was the most hilarious thing in the world. And I suggested, maybe we should do is we should put Nair on his legs one night, but we didn't have any Nair with us. So there went that idea. But another counselor had suggested that, but we didn't have any Nair with us, so we couldn't do it. But
Josh, you need to add to your repertoire when you're interviewing radio people and interviewing them on your podcast. You need to include the question, what prank jokes were you involved in over the years? Because there are a lot of them that don't normally get told casually.
Great idea. I mean, I've never asked that question. I just read that. I was like, wait a minute, why didn't I ask other people about this question,
It's a great question to ask, and trust me, we've all got them. I don't know how many are going to share it. Josh, I've got to do something that I regret doing. I am running out of time, and I'm up against another appointment, but if you care to pursue this conversation at a later time, I'd love to make Chapter 2 of it come up sometime soon.
That would be great. We're going to do that. This is the Talking Archive. We're talking with Roger W. Morgan, and next time we're going to ask him some more questions. We're going to ask him at KOIL. There were a lot of rock bands that came there when he was there, and we'll find out who those rock bands were. Plus, we'll get his more information and more stories about KYA, the boss of the Bay, as well as going to a jazz station in the Bay Area. Be sure to ask me next time about my encounter with Paul McCartney in Scotland on the hillside. If you haven't uncovered that story, it appears somewhere on the Internet. If you just Google Roger W. Morgan, Paul McCartney, it'll come up. And you'll see right away why it could be the highlight of our next visit. And that will be the first question I ask him next time here on the Talking Archive. I'm Josh Jacobs. We're talking with Roger W. Morgan, Radio Hall of Famer and program director, as well as general manager. He's worked many jobs in radio over the years. And Roger, thank you again for being with us. Thank you, Josh. Okay. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.